In the last 48 hours, how to improve Nigeria's bilateral relationship with Qatar has been among the priorities of President Bola Tinubu. Now, is there a win-win outlook for both countries? Well, tonight, Babajide Ogunsanwo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data consultant, is here to tell us more and the answer to this question. Hello, Babajide. It's good to have you on the news at 10. Is there a fair way, to compare the economic potential of Nigeria and Qatar?
There are several ways we could look at it. But first, some people believe that the president did not go to Qatar, and I'll explain that. Some say the president went to Bayelsa State. Why do they say so? Qatar, with its population of 2.7 million persons, is the same with the population of Bayelsa State. So you understand about that perspective. Some even say the president went to Rivers State, and that's because Rivers State, with its land area of just about 11,000 square kilometers, is the same, approximately the same land area with Qatar. So if you say the president went to Qatar, yes, you're right. If you say he probably went to the equivalent of Bayelsa State or Rivers State, you're right. But again, even some believe the president perhaps made a short trip to heaven. And that's because Qatar is among the top 10 richest countries in the world if we look at it from that proxy of GDP per person. And so different ways to look at it depending on what your goal is. But if we want to compare in strict terms, like you said, we can take a look at the strengths of Nigeria relative to Qatar and look at some of the areas where we could be able to see some win-wins, just as you've called it. And if we take a look at that, here's what you'll see. On the population side, we're clearly, we have a population strength, human capital force, talent force that is significantly dominating that of Qatar. In terms of the size of the economy, the fact from the World Bank shows that the Nigerian economy is larger than that of Qatar. $472 billion is the size of the Nigerian economy. Qatar, just below $250 billion. Land area, in simple terms, Nigeria is so big that we can situate 80 Qatars in Nigeria. And in terms of agriculture, that is a big advantage for us. 75% of our land is arable. In Qatar, 94% of their land can't be used to grow any meaningful commercial crops. Here's where they have their strengths. Even though their economy is not as large, because of their small population, their economic value creation in terms of GDP per capita per person, GDP per person is significantly higher than Nigeria. And if you ever get a chance to be reborn, you most likely would have, you'll make it to your 70s if you were born in Qatar, and clearly because they have developed more oil and gas infrastructure and better savings habits, they have a stronger external reserves compared to Nigeria.
But Babajide, now, how do we know how much value the president got out of this visit to Qatar?
If you've been following the president pre-campaign, the president seems to be quite smart about this. And so in football, there's something called leg over. Qatar really isn't, if you understand how President Tinubu is thinking, looking at these metrics, Qatar perhaps is not his final destination. Evidence looking at his speeches pre-campaign, during campaign, shows that most likely this is really all about that G6, the Gulf states. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, UAE. So this is just a warm-up. This is a distraction. This isn't really, I don't think this is really where the president wants to extract value. Again, part of the major challenges why the president has gone, yes, is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but on this visit to Qatar, President Tinubu has changed his title. He's now the commander-in-chief of marketers. Why do I say so? Let's take a look at the global investment and foreign direct investment situation all over the world, especially Africa. It allows us to understand how difficult getting investment into Nigeria and Africa is. What is in front of us allows us to see what has happened in the last 2 years, released by the World Bank. In 2021, the World Bank states that approximately $1.5 trillion of global FDI was looking for a place to live. Foreign direct investments looking for where to go. Among the $1.4 trillion, $881 billion went to developing economies, which is good. But among the developing economies, Africa got only $80 billion. In simple terms, out of the 1.4 trillion global fixed foreign direct investments, Africa only attracted 5%. It even got worse in 2022. Out of $1.29 trillion worth of monies looking for where to live, foreign direct investment, only $45 billion got into Africa, representing 3% worse than what it was in 2021. To put it in simple terms, 97 out of 100 investors do not bring their money into Africa. And so that's why President Tinubu has worn this garment and dropped his garment of Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces in Lagos and gone to Qatar as the Commander-in-Chief of Marketers, trying to attract more investment into Nigeria, trying to attract more investment into Africa. But again, understanding how President Tinubu works, looking at his body language, I think this is a leg over. The president is actually going beyond Qatar.
But put it simply, I mean, anyone watching this will want to know, what does Nigeria have that Qatar needs? And what does Nigeria actually need from Qatar?
Yeah, that's perhaps the biggest question of the day, what people are asking. But for us too, before we go into that, one of the ways to really understand, and I like how you put it, what does Nigeria need that Qatar has, and what does Qatar need that Nigeria has? From the Qatar perspective, one way to understand it is to understand what does Qatar import. And after doing extensive research, there are 5 things that come up on that list in terms of what does Qatar import. Number 1, private and military jets. Number 2, commercial aeroplanes. Number 3, motor vehicles. Number 4, smartphones. And number 5, gold jewelry. And so one country in Africa is tapping into gold jewelry, and that is South Africa. South Africa exports so much gold jewelry to Qatar. That is a major export for South Africa to Qatar. For Kenya, it is roses. Kenya exports a lot of roses to Qatar. For Nigeria at the moment, what's the answer? Here is it. Based on the information available both within Nigeria and from the government of Qatar, they say Nigeria's #1 export to Qatar, cashew nuts. Okay. Now, it isn't bad that we're exporting cashew, make no mistakes. The challenge is the value and weight of the cashew we're exporting is beyond what we can use. The value we're getting from exporting cashew is too insignificant to transform Nigeria. So we have to really rethink it. If we're going to go across the cashew route, which is an advantage for us, we've got arable land. The Qatari government clearly needs agriculture because they don't have arable land. However, we cannot be exporting bottles and little quantities of cashew because it wouldn't get us to the promised land. You know, there's a popular saying that one man's meat is another man's poison. In Nigeria, one man's cashew can be another man's cash. Yeah. And so, yes, cashew isn't bringing us money, but if we think through our value chain, we can position cashew to be among one of Nigeria's greatest exports to Qatar and other nations. Another thing, you know, I talked about the Qatari government and the country importing a lot of private jets, smartphones, motorcycles, motor vehicles. We might, at this point in our economic life, might not be able to export all those items to Qatar. However, we can export some of these raw materials to countries that make smartphones, and eventually those smartphones will get into Qatar. So we also need to think about re-exporting. Look at what's in front of us. At the moment, Nigeria and Qatar, based on data, are backing each other. We are not extracting value. What do I mean? Qatar's exports last year, within the first 9 months, $270 billion Qatari rial. Out of that, how much exports went to Nigeria? Less than 1%. Same thing with Nigeria. First 9 months of last year, we exported approximately 24 trillion naira worth of goods to the world. How much did you export to Qatar? Less than 1%. And so clearly what we've seen is a lot of talk has been happening between Nigeria and Qatar for decades. However, that is not translating to economic value like what you've seen. So Qatar is doing a lot of exports. Few of their exports gets to Nigeria. Nigeria is doing a lot of exports, needs to do so much more. But even out of Nigeria's little exports of 24 trillion naira, very little gets to Qatar. So you understand why I say that this perhaps is a leg over. Perhaps the president has a longer term plan, but in the event, at the final day, this remains our #1 export to Qatar.
All right, so I hope that, in summary, let's hope for positive outcome from this marketing strategy from the president. Thank you very much, Babajide Ogunsanwo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, for your time.
Thank you,
on the News at 10.